everybody. Welcome back to the Business of Laravel podcast, where I interview business leaders who are working with and within Laravel. I've got some wonderful guests today. This is my first time doing two guests, so we're going to see how it works out. So I'm going to ask y'all to get started just saying, hey, can you introduce yourselves and say, who are you and what's your business and how is Laravel involved? And we're just going to get started from there. So I'll hand it off to you.
Guess I'll start then. I'm Mathias, and this is...
I'm Michele.
Yeah. We co-founded Geocodio in 2013.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
We do run on Laravel, and I think we started out with Laravel 5, the first beta version of Laravel 5 back then.
Nice. So let's talk about Geocodio really quickly. I know what it is, but I have to do my thing where I pretend I don't have any idea. So for somebody who's never heard of it before, what does the service actually provide, and who are you targeting with that service?
Right. So sometimes I have a little bit of a developer description for this, and I have a non-developer description.
Okay.
But basically what we do is geocoding, which is the process of converting addresses into coordinates and coordinates into addresses. Mm-hmm. That's what we do at a very basic level. Our niche in the market is focusing on the US and Canada and on use cases where people need additional data that you can only get when you have the coordinates. So, For example, if you want to know census information or congressional districts or time zones or tons of other kinds of data, those coordinates are basically doorways to other pieces of information. And so where we sit and what we do for people is basically they no longer have to hit, 5 different APIs to get the one piece of information they actually care about. Instead, they can get it all in one API request or in a spreadsheet from us. And so our goal is to save people time and effort and hassle and money when they are dealing with location data.
Yeah, really optimizing for developer happiness.
Yeah, from the beginning.
As easy and simple as possible.
Yeah.
That's our goal.
And it was fundamentally built for use cases we had ourselves, which is part of why it was built with the tools we love using, like Laravel, but also very much built as the product that we wanted to use, and making it be as seamless as possible as a developer experience as we could.
That's so cool. Okay, so you mentioned you wanted to build the thing that you wanted, and it's so interesting because Taylor talks about that so often. He says, I built the tool that I wanted to have. And so it's really fun hearing you all say, we built this because we wanted it, because it feels like that's the inspiration for a good product, because you're not always throwing out these hypotheticals of what might someone want. You're like, we need this now, but also a good experience, because you mentioned developer experience. And if you're the developer using the thing, it's certainly going to be a good experience for you. Can you tell a little bit about what you all were building that motivated you to do this in the first place? What was the story of the creation of the project?
Yeah, so we built numerous apps and different things using geographic data, so they kind of kept coming up. But one thing in particular that really was the breaking point was we used to have this app that basically let you find convenience stores and grocery stores around you that were open at the time you're looking. So this was back when Google Places didn't really exist, and Yelp wasn't really as much of a thing in terms of having reliable opening hour data. Yeah. So we built this app that basically had tons of grocery stores and convenience stores and things like that. And we used to map them all on a map. We need to get the coordinates so we can figure out which ones are closest to you. And we were using Google Maps at the time for geocoding, and we kept hitting API limits, like how many lookups we were able to make every day. And at the time, there wasn't really a pay-as-you-go option. So either there was the free tier with some very hard limits, or you had to pay $10,000 a year as a starting point to get their enterprise product or something like that. And it just wasn't an option to pay at least $10,000 a year. Yeah. So long story short, we sat down and tried to prototype building our own geocoder. And the idea was, even if it's not very good, if it's just good enough, that actually works for our use case. It just has to be somewhat accurate. It doesn't have to be super fast. We are computing all these coordinates ahead of time and things like that. But if it was free for us to use, we didn't have to worry about all these limits. It'll be great. And that's what we built. And we started using it ourselves, and it was like half decent. It worked all right. So we decided, why don't we try to charge for it? Maybe someone else could use it as well. And this kind of also played into it. At a time, we had our first daughter, and we were starting to look into daycare, and daycare costs was absolutely insane. And we were trying to, figure out how to make a little bit extra money on the side to make everything work out. And we're like, well, let's try to charge for this thing we built. And we had a lot of we got a lot of feedback right away. We were actually fortunate enough to be page 1 of Hacker News, which was cool. Really exciting. We were like on the front page for like 24 hours. We got tons of traffic from it. We didn't get very many paying customers.
That's Hacker News for you.
Some, though, which was a huge surprise to us.
We could see we were definitely stirring the pot. We were like, there was some demand here. People were excited about this. There's a lot of constructive feedback too.
That's Hacker News for you.
Right. But that kind of just fueled the fire that people liked talking about this. That made us want to, continue working on it.
That's awesome.
And I think the fact that, it came out of something that we needed in order for a product to be successful, it can't stay the product that you needed. Right?
Yeah.
It very quickly needs to grow and improve and be something that can serve many, many more use cases. For us, something that was scrappy and worked good enough was good enough, but that's not good enough for paying customers.
Yeah.
And I think also there's a little bit of the psychology in that actually it was a friend of ours who said, hey, why don't you slap a paywall in front of this? Because we were like, this is nowhere good enough for anyone to charge for it.
Yeah.
And a lot of work went into it before it was launched to make it better, to make it something that we were proud of selling. But I think we still have a little bit of that. I don't know if it's an underdog mentality, but I think having a product that we are proud of, that is something that we feel justified in taking money for, and that being something that we're really proud of putting out in the world, and that we respect ourselves. I think that is something that has guided us the whole time, is to always make it better and always be proud of what we're doing, whether that's the product or how we conduct ourselves as a business, how we conduct ourselves with customers, with our employees. That I think that really came out of how the product was initially developed and has really guided us.
And to be clear, a lot has happened since that first initial
it is. If you go look on Hacker News, if you want to go chuckle and have, it's kind of our Dropbox moment when someone's like, oh, this is actually very simple. In Linux, you just do blah, 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 right? Like there's those comments on ours as well. And, and it's so funny to look back on it. And there's a lot of critical feedback. And honestly, like it was correct to the point where I remember, we were doing pay-as-you-go pricing only at that point. And I remember that, we had integrated Stripe and everything. We had planned to make money on it. But when February 1st came around, we launched, was January 20th, 21st, 2014? And February 1st came around, and I remember you ran a database query, and I was like, oh, like people actually need to pay us. And you hadn't actually written the script that would trigger the charges in Stripe because we didn't actually expect anyone to pay us.
Yeah, that wasn't important.
Right. Yeah.
It was like $30, and but it meant that our first month, that paid for the 2 little DigitalOcean droplets, right?
Yeah.
For $20.
Yeah.
We made $10, and we were on top of the world. Like I remember I'd made this spreadsheet of like levels of success for this, and there was like an acceptable success was that we launched it and people used it. Like that was what we were going for.
We made it.
A disappointment was we launch it and like nothing happens with it. And then a wild success was we launch it and not only do people pay us, but it covers its expenses.
Its own costs, yeah.
Which seems like a really adorable goal of, like, I was like, oh my God, we profited $10. Like this is winning, it's really funny looking back on that, but
because I was listening to Aaron and Taylor and Ian talk about this the other day, and they're talking about being break even and how that's actually a huge success in itself. Not operating at a loss. So being able to do that, and again, being really scrappy, we had very low costs. Like the domain name was one of the most expensive things that we had to purchase, right?
Yes.
Of course, we weren't even paying ourselves.
No.
So
yeah, right. We don't even consider that.
We're not even at ramen profitable at this point or anything like that, right? But just starting, like, that's the cool thing. Like, as a developer or working on tech, like doing a tech business, is you can get started as long as you have a computer with internet connection. You can really get started with very, very you don't need very much.
Very low cost.
Funding
right. I mean, it can be. Right? I think it was probably over 6 months. The development cost that went into it in terms of servers and whatnot was probably a couple $100. And I think anybody who is in a serious relationship or married to a developer just knows that server costs are going to be part of the family budget.
Right. Whether or not they're bringing in any money, it's just going to be there.
Right.
So
that's just in there. And so it was very, very scrappy to get it off the ground.
All right. So I have so many questions. You guys are amazing guests because I'm like, you just gave me so much to work with. So there's so many really great points you guys just made there, but one of the things that really stands out to me is watching the interplay between the two of you. And I was curious if you could talk a little bit about, like, what roles do you take in the company and what is it like running a company together with your partner? And is that something you ever expected to do?
It's so natural to us.
It is,
So for context, we met at work. And
really?
We were coworkers for a long time before we were together. And I was the project manager and you were a developer on the team. You were my best developer on the team. So, and we worked there. I want to say I left like a year and a half after we got married.
Yeah, something
right?
like that.
So for a while we worked there and worked together. And so that was kind of normal for us. And then we both sort of went on our own directions. You went to work for a startup. I went to work for another company. I really wanted to be in a full-time product role. You wanted to be, we'd been working at an agency. You really wanted to be working at a product company.
Yeah.
We both really wanted to be at product companies, I guess. Mm-hmm. And even though our experience at the agency was amazing and some of our best friends came out of that. Oh. And so we went our own directions, and I remember we would come home from work, and there's always something you're frustrated about, even in the best job.
Yeah.
And there would be times when you'd be like, oh, I wish you were the product, the product manager on my team, or I wish you were one of my developers, because I know that I could just and
it's like speak the same language here.
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it was so often. And I think the working together, to us always felt very natural.
Yeah.
But I think the bigger challenge was around, is this business something that can sustain our family? Is this, and really taking that plunge. I mean, I waited until much longer than most other people would. I waited until it was making 4 times my salary, because we were so afraid that it would just kind of evaporate overnight. Mm-hmm. And I remember you were chomping at the bit for a long time. And it was just but health insurance, that's 30, 45K a year, plus everything else. We have to make sure this is stable. We have a family. There was just so...
You're really putting all your eggs in one basket, right? When you're both relying on the same company. If that, tanks, we both hit at the same time, right?
Yeah.
But it got to a point where it just wasn't sustainable. And so then shortly after I went full-time, you went part-time. And then a year later, you were full-time. And that was, both literally and figuratively, that was coming home. Yeah. Because not only were we both sitting in the home office every day, but that was returning to normal. Yeah. To be working together. And I think, every relationship, every marriage is different. there are amazing couples who could never work together and, would kill each other.
Yeah.
And like that there are siblings who get along really well and could never work together. There are couples who could work together. And I don't think it's really a judgment on the relationship itself.
Yeah.
It's a very different dynamic, but to us it is the most normal thing in the world, and I wouldn't want any other co-founder.
I want a little heart emoji in the video right now, just to pop up.
Bubbles in the screen.
Exactly. That's awesome.
And at that point, actually, just to sort of take it from there, we talked a lot about like, okay, so where do we want to take this business? Where do we want to go? And we decided pretty early on that it was really calm just to be the two of us. Yeah. It was very easy to make decisions. We both worked at companies that had a lot of meetings on a given week. We spent a lot of time sitting in meetings and trying to coordinate things between teams. And we were really excited at that time, removing all that overhead. And if you want to make a decision or, figure something out, we can just talk to each other. We're sitting next to each other. It's very easy. We don't have to go through a lot of people. And that autonomy and everything was really exciting. So we actually decided back then that what we want to do was just as long as it's possible, we just want to stay a 2-person company, just the two of us. We don't need to grow. And that's actually a really big thing. We wanted to just be stable and steady as is. We didn't want the company or the business to grow. And we've talked to a lot of people also like in the startup and bootstrap community, and it's very uncommon not to want to grow the company like crazy, right?
Or like during that time, I guess.
Crazy.
We confused a lot of people. Yeah. And there were also a lot of people that assumed our business was not doing well if we hadn't hired people. And so explaining that was a conscious choice and was always interesting. And I think looking back on it, I think, we've since changed our approach to that, and we do have employees now. Okay. I think, quite frankly, both of us were just we needed some time to come up for air after working in bigger companies, and just really needed calm for a period of time until we realized, even though we weren't planning on it, we've actually been growing, and now things aren't so calm anymore, and we do need to bring more people in, and that is how we get calm, is by bringing people in. And our perspective has changed, but we both sort of needed what was it, 2 to 3 years of cooling off period after leaving, the quote unquote corporate world. Yeah. Before we were comfortable with that.
Yeah, it's so interesting because just the two of you does sound like the calm thing until you start thinking about what if you want to take a vacation, or what if you want to eventually,
Bingo.
Right. And so then you have to make a more complicated structure in order to bring. So I love that you're each point we're using calm as our kind of our North Star. And there's different times of the business where calm is achieved different ways. And you weren't so stuck in the idea that two of us means calm that you couldn't adjust for that. So you're able to, was there a moment where you went, hold on, husband or wife, hey, this is, we need to shift? Or do you just feel like your understandings of it shifted over time together?
I think you hit it right on the nail when you said vacation, because we realized, I guess it was about 8 years in or something like that. We never really had a true vacation.
Was that 2 or 3 years ago then?
Yeah, not too long. We hired a first employee 2 years ago, 2 years and 2 months ago, right?
Yeah,
roughly. And that's when we sort of realized we have not had a single vacation where we haven't been on standby.
Yep. Customer service, if anything
just
goes
customer
wrong.
Service is a big.
Going on vacation while taking our laptops, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
And just knowing that you gotta make sure you keep replying to customers. First of all, you can't just not reply for a week, but also not to have a huge backlog when you come back. And then you come back from vacation, and it's actually really stressful suddenly because you have
not that
big
peaceful,
pile
right?
of things.
I mean, I remember where were we? We were at some theme park.
This happened several times.
No, I remember not a year after it had launched. Oh, we were at, I think it was Universal in Florida.
Oh yeah.
And servers went down or whatever it was.
Oh,
and Matthias is on his phone, in terminal, standing in line for a ride. Right. And then a couple years later, there was another time when I think we were at Sesame Place in Pennsylvania. Remember that? And again, Matthias is standing in line for a ride, SSHing into a server, like, and it was kind of like, it took us some time to realize that maybe we didn't need to work like that. I think for so long we still had that fear of it going away from one day to the next, that, you know, a big competitor would come in and make a pricing change or whatever it is and just wipe us out. And also we were so grateful to have the business that we didn't mind, because the fact that we had the business and we had that extra income meant that we got to take that trip to Universal in the first place. So we're like, well, if we have to do like an hour at work, that's fine, because we wouldn't have gotten to take this trip without it. So it wasn't a big deal. But I think, you know, after 10 years of that, you start to wonder if life has to be that way, especially when the business was, you know, more than sustaining us and sustaining itself. That we started to, you know, as you said it so eloquently, like, I need this like crocheted or embroidered on a pillow and like put in my office, that, you know, calm was always the North Star, but the way we have achieved calm has changed. Like, that is like chef's kiss, like, truly, like, you should sell merch with that. Like,
I was about to say, your words back to you.
Yeah,
you're the one who said it. So,
that's cool. I love that. So as you guys are working together, you now have employees, and the world becomes a little bit different because, and I tell everybody this, I'm like, if you want to be a programmer and you start a company, you're now going to be someone who runs a company, not somebody who codes. Are you all finding that as you've built out a team, you're able to do less of what you enjoy, or are you able to still protect what you like doing and find joy in what you're doing now? Like, what has that shift been from being just the workers to also now being employers and organizers and managers and all that stuff?
Well, if I could start for a second. I think one distinction I would draw is that it's not that hiring employees means that we are able to do less of the things that are our core functional capacities, right? It's that having a larger business means that we are unable to do as much you know, of the things that are our core skill set, and that bringing employees on forces us to add new things to our skill set, or maybe get better at things that weren't core to that before. But fundamentally actually get us closer to being back in that place of working on what it is we're truly good at and what we can uniquely bring to the business. And like the expression of calm changing, I think the expression of what we can uniquely bring to the business, that also changes. And so we cannot have a static view of ourselves either.
And I think, so there's just 4 of us right now. So it's not like we've grown significantly. We also grown like staff-wise really slowly, intentionally. Again, calm. So we're not at a point where Michele and I have a lot of sort of management or HR tasks that's really eating up a majority of our time. I would say, at least. So that's sort of one thing. Another thing is we've also been really clear on our intentions when we were hiring, that the roles are going to be very independent. And in fact, Michele and I live in Denmark now, and our 2 employees are in the US, and on different time zones, actually, from each other. So it means we actually have limited overlap in terms of working hours. So there's not a lot of there's still not a lot of meetings and like synchronous time, for good or for worse. That's also you know, can also be a challenge sometimes. But we basically structured it this way and set the expectations from day one, that this is how we work.
Well, can we talk about managing a remote team for a little bit? Because I know there's a lot of kind of different ways. So at Titan, we have a almost entirely synchronous team. I mean, people work from around the world, but if people work outside of the US time zones, we ask them to basically just work in our time zones. If they live outside our time zones, we ask them to work our time zones with at least like half a day overlap. And I know that Basecamp are like the biggest people who've written about remote, and theirs was all about async, is all about write the things up and then people will get to it when they get to it. Have you found yourselves leaning into any of the kind of the Basecamp ways of doing things as you kind of pass documents back and forth, or are you kind of just making it up as you go?
I would say we are still figuring it out. I think each company needs to figure out for themselves what works for their business and the people within it. Basecamp, I mean, some of their writing was really formative for us. I remember reading some of their books, God, probably like a decade and a half ago now.
It's been a while, yeah.
And were really formative for me. And we've been talking a lot about the Basecamp Employee Handbook lately. And I think for us, I wouldn't say that we're at the point where we can write and publish our own handbook publicly and say, hey, do exactly this. Because we're still figuring it out. And companies change a lot from going from 2 people to 4, 5 to 7 is a huge jump. 5 to 10 is a massive jump. That's a doubling in the organization. So I think we're still figuring out. We still have a lot of learning to do. I think we try to over communicate to our employees that they should give us feedback on it. And if something isn't working or do something differently, we both each have a weekly sync at least, with, because we each sort of have one person underneath us plus additional meetings. But hoping that, part of why we hired them and can work with people who might only have 2 or 3 hours of daily overlap with us during a normal working day is because we trust them. And we try to do what we can to make sure that trust is going both ways, and that if it's everything from something that isn't working or something they just want to try to help us connect better, that they feel like that feedback can flow in both directions.
We're trying, so you're saying we're trying different things. One thing we found particular successful for asynchronous communication is basically sharing small video clips. We use a tool called Loom.
Yeah, we do a lot of Looms.
Loom is fantastic. There's lots of other options out there for something like that. But that is a huge time saver, because a lot of things that would have been a meeting instead is just a video clip where you can kind of go through the problem you're trying to solve or an idea you have or something like that.
That's awesome. Yeah, we use Slack for everything, and Slack has recently added basically their own internal Loom, and it has definitely encouraged us to use it a lot more when you just say, I can type this whole message, or type, can we have a meeting, or I could just click a button and record a 5-minute video, and it's really impressive how much you can communicate there. You were talking about hiring real quick there, and that's one of the questions I wanted to ask you all, and I'm guessing you have one developer and one non-developer, is that right?
That's right.
Okay. Well, because this is about Laravel, I'm going to start primarily focusing on the developer. What was your experience like in hiring a Laravel developer? Because I get asked all the time by business people who are saying, hey, should we invest in Laravel? Our tech guy has us talking to you as a potential consultancy, but we're unsure about Laravel because it's, JavaScript is the hotness. Can we actually find people who do Laravel? So every time I want to ask somebody, like, what was your experience like hiring for Laravel?
So that's actually kind of interesting, because when we hired, his name is Corey. He's fantastic. And the story is he was the first hire we did. And the story is basically that I used to work with Corey at a company I worked at previously. And he was on the customer support team, and he was kicking butt. Yeah. He was really, really great. Nice. And a nice person to be around, and I was, really happy to work with him, even though, we didn't interface that often, but I was sitting next to him for a long time, and he was a great guy. And I just happened to notice that he had sent himself through like a coding boot camp. He wanted to transition to be a developer. And I noticed this just around the time that he just had finished boot camp. And we were looking for some help on the customer support side, but we also wanted someone who was technical, because a lot of the customer support is very technical nature. Like oftentimes we work with code samples and stuff like that.
And I also wanted a technical marketing person to write, example projects, code samples, like, marketing to developers, basically.
Yeah.
so the boot camp we went through didn't really have anything Laravel specific or PHP even in it. But he worked with React and a bunch of technologies like that. We use that on our marketing website. And we also use Node in certain utilities and stuff internally. As a small company, you're going to wear many hats. So we basically offered him a role of, well, we want some help with custom support, but we also want to offer you a developer role at the same time. And like the whole, developer relationships, like content strategist, all these kind of things in one blob. So his role is basically half custom support, half being like a content engineer is what we call it. So working on a lot of the technical stuff for the website, documentation, code samples, some of our official client-side libraries and things like that.
Actually, after we hired him, we learned that in undergrad, he had spent a lot of time doing AV production.
Yeah.
And so he's really amazingly adept at making videos and like loved doing it. And we were like, and he's like, can I do more of that? And we're like, yes, you can definitely do more of that, please.
But as he's gotten more experienced and had more time, in the field working on code and shipping code, we certainly got to a point where he wanted to broaden his, experience and learn more things. So what we started on last year was getting his set up with Laracasts.
Nice.
And sort of getting the ball rolling on learning PHP and Laravel. And sort of slowly adding, giving him different projects that involve Laravel. But that's just to say that, it's also an option to hire someone who actually doesn't have Laravel experience and transition into that role. Especially nowadays with so many different programming languages that all look like each other quite a lot. So switching from JavaScript to PHP isn't as massive of a learning curve as other things.
But it is funny that you ask about our experience hiring Laravel developers, because while we hired a developer and then turned him into a Laravel developer, he'll be at Laracon with you, or on the way of, he'll be at Laracon with you in August, or the Laracon US rather, not Laracon or Live US.
Laravel Live.
Yeah. We are actually, for like over a month now, we have been talking about hiring another developer who would, of course, be a Laravel developer, though we also need other stuff too. Yeah. And I think this is kind of one of the challenges that we face as a small organization is both of us wear so many different hats and span so many different functions. You're just talking about Corey, who spans, several different areas. Yeah. Like, I think so we're sort of starting that process of exploring it, but also seeing quite clearly that this is, not traditionally going to fall into a box of one discrete role. And so how do you find those people that span multiple areas? Yeah.
So basically we decided that we don't want to hire for multiple roles here. We actually want one person with multiple hats, like wearing multiple hats. And we need someone who's both an experienced Laravel developer, but who's also, has some experience with DevOps or like Linux systems administration and things like that. So we have someone who can also have a bit of a view into the infrastructure side of things as well. So we slowly starting to get the ball rolling at that. Although I'm a little bit worried we kind of are looking for a unicorn, but I'm sure.
I also maybe
we'll find someone.
It's totally a unicorn, or maybe narwhal is a better word or something, because it would also be amazing if they were like kind of like Nova Scotia area too, because that's the best time zone overlap, in terms of like the most overlap with us, but also overlap with the US, so they can talk to people, or like Iceland. So like if there's a DevOps Laravel developer person in Iceland, Greenland, Nova Scotia, that kind of area. Totally, we're totally looking for a narwhal.
Yeah, someone who likes to get up really early.
Yes. Well, I'm trying to zoom out. My Google Maps is taking too long because it knows I'm talking with its competitor right now. But I think there's some areas of South America. So I would encourage you guys to consider looking at Brazil.
Actually, yeah, I made a whole list. Yeah, no, there was Brazil. There was, I made a whole table of this. I think it was
Nice.
there's like some places in West Africa too that are like a decent overlap. Like, and I think the challenge is like, well, we're in Denmark. Why wouldn't we hire for Europe time zone too? But this person would really need to be available, with at least 4 hours of overlap with the US, because all of our customers and employees are in North America.
Yeah.
And so that's really where we need the most overlap. But yeah, I think it's, I can't picture the map in my head, but it's everywhere from sort of like the very far west coast of Africa over to US Central is where we had to draw the line, because US West Coast is
you got options
too far from us. That's 9 hours.
Yeah. Well, I want to officially recommend to any Americans listening right now that we have historically said time zone is our constraint, not continent. And that has opened us up to South America in a way that I think a lot of other folks are, not looking right now, who are traditionally just like North America based. And the number of capable, talented Laravel programmers who speak English pretty well in South America is much higher than folks are aware. And I think that's true outside of South America, but then you run into time zone issues. But if someone is just looking for programmers within the American time zones, the US time zones, I encourage them to consider looking south. So
that's such a good point. Yeah. I think I don't mean to.
No, that sounds really good.
Yeah, not include them because they are on my.
Part of it is that we don't often think of the fact that South America is so further east compared to North America, and so it's just I didn't know at first that I was like, that's actually a benefit you can get there. So that's cool.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so I want to talk really quickly about your experience as employers outside of the Laravel context. You talk about hiring folks, but you hired somebody who's not a programmer. And then also you mentioned ops, and you said, okay, well, ops and HR stuff is not taking up too much of our time. But one of the things I think was really fun that you said was, when the company gets big, we're not able to do the things we want to do, and hiring allows us to get back to that calm. Is there a arrangement? Let's say you just had, the ability to hire 3 more people. Is there an arrangement where you said, because I'm sorry, I keep coming to this, but like you said, I want to do what only I uniquely can do. And I say that, I talk to founders all the freaking time, and they're like, how do I organize and how do I hire? And I'm like, you should only do what you can uniquely do. And the first thing you should be leaning for in terms of hiring, delegating, whatever, is the things that you do that somebody else could do. As you all have been building this company, what are the things that you have looked at that you said, I don't want to do that? And as it's gotten bigger, those are the things I want to delegate away that you haven't found the ability to delegate away yet. Like, what would your dream be? And it sounds like you're trying to hire a programmer, so maybe it's the stuff that person's doing. But are there any roles or responsibilities that come along with sort of just like the meta work of running a business, that if there was just a unicorn, not a programmer unicorn, but like a operations, HR, whatever unicorn, you could just say, if I never had to do that ever again, I would pay people money for it. Is there anything that's like sitting there in your business owner mind?
I think not anything currently that really can be fully offboarded like that. I think, but a huge motivation for hiring our finance person was the amount of time I was spending on sales taxes. And so we had to go through sales tax compliance in, was this 2022 now? And I had a virtual assistant for several years. That was actually our first sort of dipping our toes in the water, was when I got a VA in 2020 through this company called Squared Away, which is amazing. They hire military spouses as virtual assistants because they are a highly educated, highly competent group of people. But because their spouses are in the military, they have to move often. They have kind of some different constraints on their life that make it hard for them to have a traditional 9-to-5 job. Yeah. And so I had several assistants through there. And actually, once I was dealing with all of the sales tax stuff, I, asked my assistant if she would help with it. And she had previously been a staff accountant before marrying someone in the military and having a family and moving all around. And so as that side of the business really ramped up, with not just with sales taxes, but also with just following up on invoices and getting things paid and signing up on procurement portals and all of that kind of stuff, that once I realized that was, and I think you were the one who was like, you don't need to be spending all of your time on this.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that's really where we help each other too, is kind of to push each other to say, this is really not a core competency for you, and it's exhausting you, and this is a very clear thing that we could delegate. And so she was my assistant for 2 years, and then we brought her on full time. And so that worked out so well. Also, again, we already trusted her.
Yeah.
We already knew what her capabilities were. And so that was a really great transition. And I think for us, we were hesitant about hiring for a long time. And so starting out with a VA, and you can get a VA who's doing everything from bookkeeping to, organizing events or scheduling or helping with sales or whatever that is, that's that kind of thing that you have to do, the meta work that you have to do, but for you is draining or time consuming or not fulfilling or something you're just butting your head up against and dread. Yeah. A really, really good transition. And, we paid squared away a finder's fee for hiring her away. And I was
no hard feelings.
I
right?
was very happy to do so because they saved me from going through a long hiring process to find someone. So.
That's brilliant. I hugely support people using VAs in general, and especially in the context you're talking about when you're not ready. I mean, first of all, I tell people, like, if you're not ready to hire, contractors are a great way to go, because contractors don't expect that you're going to have work for them every single week. You're not now under the gun now to add an extra several $1,000s to payroll every 2 weeks. It's this much more flexible thing where we can give and we can come back and nobody can be upset if you're like, hey, I don't have any work for you this week. So in general, contractors are great. And then VAs are great because, just like you said, like, you find, like, if you're going to be using this VA well, you say, what things do I not want to be doing right now? What things can be delegated? And even as I'm teaching people at Titan who aren't owners of the company, I'm teaching them, like, hey, you have too much on your plate right now. I want you to identify what pieces of your job can be turned into sort of like a system or a process and be done by somebody who doesn't know your domain knowledge, but has a brain. And then let's delegate those over the VA. It's really an underutilized resource, I think. So I'm really happy to hear that y'all not only used one, but actually eventually ended up hiring them. That's a really cool experience. Okay, so we're running short on time, and I have so many more questions for you. So I'm trying to kind of limit them down. Okay, if somebody else heard your journey from working in the corporate world and being a project manager and or product owner and a developer, and then now having this wonderful, successful business that kind of like takes care of the family, stuff like that, and they wanted to follow that same journey that you did, is there any one piece of guidance or advice or recommendations or warnings that you would give to them if they want to kind of go the same direction you did?
I think the idea of bootstrapping and being lean has really made it possible for us to get to the point where we are. We actually didn't have to take major risks for the first several years because we could work on this, weekends and evenings as time permitted. I think the big thing for us, now we have been doing this for so long, is to keep your spirits up and keep going, right? Because there are also bad days. There are days where you're like, why are we even doing this? Is it even worth it? Especially early on. Sometimes, like, we spend all this time on this, like, and we just paid for $30 servers. Is this worth it? That's another way to look at it, right? But I think persistence is a really big thing. And also, I think it's also important, now we're talking about this, is talk about all the things that didn't work. Because if you talk to any successful founder or startup, if you ask them about all the things they've done before, and you would hear a long list of things that didn't work out. Yes. We've built so many things individually and so many things together prior to this, and this was the one thing that actually turned out to be something bigger than just like a fun little side project. You never know, what's going to stick.
And, to add to that, I think it's emerged to me through this conversation that flexibility is a really core theme. Being flexible in terms of what is it we're building and how is it we're going to get to that point of having a full-time product. flexible on how we follow our North Stars of being calm or delivering a product and an experience that we're proud of. But also, starting from the point of building something that you needed yourself, that will only get you so far. And in many cases, it won't really get you that far. Yeah. Equally as important is the thousands and thousands of emails we got from people in the first couple of months after launching saying, hey, this is great, but can you do this? Can you do that?
Yeah.
And 90% of them, we actually didn't do anything with that, but we were open and listening to people. And the 10% we did take are part of what got us to where we are today. And we didn't stop at that point. Yeah. The feedback and that ongoing conversation with customers, but also ongoing conversation with ourselves about what is it the product we want to build, what implications does that have for the kind of business that we're building and the kind of life that implies. Being flexible on the implementation of the dream is really, really important, and not getting overly attached to any one specific execution of something. If you kind of pull back any idea you might have, right? There's two pieces kind of sitting in that little idea of the box. Like there's a problem you're solving, and then there's the way you're going to solve it. And I think if you can kind of extract that a bit to just the problem you're trying to solve, which for us was developers who are frustrated when they have to do geocoding. And then you realize, oh, wait, hold on, there's actually like 10 different ways we could be executing on this.
Yeah.
And it's not just one problem, one solution. There's tons of different solutions to this. And so starting to figure out, okay, well, we had this approach. What do other people need? And how does that shift this? And so being consistent on what it is we are trying to achieve, but also being flexible in that. And I think if I had to, give concise advice about that, I couldn't, because there are so many things that go into it. I chose to write a book about one very specific part that goes into that, about how to actually listen to people and get something useful out of it. Because you can't just, build 1,000 different products for 1,000 different people with feedback, right? Because it is complicated and it's hard. And I think that's something that people should know, and they know that themselves, and maybe it makes them feel better to know that this journey is difficult. And if you're struggling, you're doing it right, because it's hard.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean it's not possible.
Yeah. I just want to underline one more time part what Michele said. Talking to your customers and listening to your customers is the number one thing that has shaped our business. And it's been so important for our journey to really understand all these use cases and what the customers really want. And we barely scratched the surface on that, but that is something Michele has spent a lot of time and really poured her heart into, and is really, really paid off and shaped where we are now.
That's awesome. And my next question, second last question was, is there anything you want to plug? So let's plug the book. Tell them about it. Tell the people about the book.
Yeah, well, the book is Deploy Empathy, a practical guide to interviewing customers. And
I was looking for a book.
Oh, we have one here.
Oh, it's there. There we go.
Love it.
There we go.
Fantastic.
It's right
and we'll link that in the show notes, everybody.
And actually, I initially started writing because I had all these developer friends who wanted to have their own product businesses, but kept running into this point where they had built what they needed themselves, and it grew to a certain level. And maybe that was a couple $100s a month. Maybe it was $0. Maybe it was a couple thousand. And then it would just kind of flatline. And I would start telling them about, we'll talk to your customers. What are they saying? What are you learning? And I was kind of met with a blank, confused stare. And so it really came out of writing the book that my developer friends needed in order to learn how to talk to people about this. And it's grown so much more beyond that. But yeah, that's...
I love that.
One thing I want to mention is I'm really excited about going to Laracon US in August, and definitely come talk to me or Corey if you might be interested in working with us. We are hoping to meet a lot of awesome people and talk to a whole bunch of people there.
And
If you happen to be on the European side of the continent or in the vicinity, we're putting on Laravel Live in Copenhagen, which is going to be the first Scandinavian unofficial Laravel conference. So definitely check it out. We've got a great speaker lineup. Unfortunately, Matt is not joining us, but next year.
Maybe next year. I'd love to. Yeah, that's so
I'm
fun.
I'm going to be speaking about how you can
Very
use
cool.
some of the
Speaking of the great lineup,
of the tools that I talk about in Deploy Empathy to get ahead in your day job.
Yeah. Love that.
How to
brilliant.
be a more valuable part of the team.
Love that.
Yeah, and I guess, I mean, if someone happens to be that, DevOps, senior Laravel developer, narwhal we're looking for that's in Nova Scotia or Brazil, or also let us know. Or maybe find Mathias at Laracon.
Yeah. We'll put both of your Twitter accounts, all your social and everything like that in the show notes. Is that the best way for folks to get a hold of you?
yeah, that's good.
Okay. Well, that sounds great. So I have one last question for you. And again, I can ask you a million more, but I'm trying to keep us in a time constraint. If a perfect client landed today and they said, you know what, this is so good, we just want to buy you out. Here's $100 million. Step away. What would you do tomorrow?
Farming stuff.
Yeah.
I'm going to go prune the apple trees.
Yeah, we talked a bit about this. Thinking about the far future. The big thing is, I don't know what I would do.
Yeah.
Like, I would be bored, I think.
Yeah. And I think
Start another company.
my dream job is to work with you, and I have that.
Oh
Yeah.
my God, you're so
I don't know
cute.
why I would. I mean, it's just like, what can another company offer me that would be better than being my own boss and working with my husband, and then the people we have chosen to work with. Like, I struggle to, and maybe this is my own naivete or something, but I just struggle to understand what would be better than that.
I could put putts around the house for 6 months and work on a few
You
things.
would go nuts.
But
You
then
would
I
go
would get
nuts.
bored.
No, it would be like 6 hours.
Yeah. All right. So you'd be like, thank you for the money, but we're going to keep doing this, and maybe do a little farming on the side.
And that's what we do
Sounds good.
now.
That's
So
life. Yeah. So basically, your life is perfect. I love that. Well, you guys are wonderful and delightful. I'm really excited to be able to see you all in person soon. Michelle, are you also coming to Laracon US or no?
No, I will be manning the fort. But I will be in
when you got
Copenhagen.
kids. Yeah.
But no, I won't be there.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I look forward to seeing you, Mathias, in person. Michelle, we're going to find some time, some way. But thank you all so much. Also, by the way, I use Geocodio and love it. So also thank you for the product. But I think that was like baseline. That's
nice to hear.
fantastic experience. But thank you for sharing all this with us. There was so much good stuff in here. I didn't even think about how much value I would get from seeing your relational dynamics. And it was such a freaking joy seeing you two just look at each other, and I'm like, oh my God, there's so much love in this room. So thank you for sharing, thank you for teaching us, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you so much for
Really
having
enjoyed
us.
it, yeah.
Yeah. And for the rest of you all, thanks for hanging out, and we will see you all next time.